All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining in. If this is your first time here, make sure and hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an interview or a video. Our goal is to help you enter into a confirmed, confident, and eternal relationship with the source of all life and purpose. And with that being said, I am pleased and honored to have my guest on with me tonight, Mr. Phil Fox. Welcome, sir.
Hey, thank you, Alex. Excited to be here. Glad to be here. And thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Why don't you tell folks a little bit about you, a little bit about your channel, and then we'll go ahead and jump in.
All right. Yeah. Well, Nidosha, Nidosha, Maragua, Mirishi, Maihagatashet. My native name is Defeats the Enemy. It was given to me by my grandfather, who was a war veteran. And he gave me this name, and I carry this name, and it's a great honor because this name actually is a warrior's name, a fighter's name. And I was never in war, never at war. But he said the only reason he was able to give me this name was because every time my feet hit the floor, I go to battle for the people in the spiritual realm. So and yeah, and then also I just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe and the Potawatomi. I just want to honor them and thank them for their stewardship of these lands, and allowing me and my family to be on these lands as well. Yeah. So my European name is Mr. Phil Fox. Sorry for the long introduction, of course, but Mr. Phil Fox, Drops of Hope Ministries. You can catch me on YouTube, and I see that Nate already threw the channel in the chat, but you can catch me at Mr. Phil Fox on all your socials. So YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Mr. Phil Fox, all of that on all those channels. So yeah, that's
all right. Well, that was a good segue actually into the first question, and you kind of said it, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit. So what tribe or tribes are you from? Do you represent? And can you tell us just, not the full history, but a little bit of history about those tribes?
Yeah. Actually, yeah, I come from three different tribes. Were sort of lumped onto one reservation, and so I represent the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara tribes. Not very well known tribes, but I guess our biggest claim to fame would be when Lewis and Clark, known as the Discovery Corps, were making their way through the northern plains. They ran into a very harsh winter, and they actually almost perished. But they ran into my tribe. A couple of our tribes were sort of already consolidated already, and so Lewis and Clark camped with us and stayed with us for a while. And actually, that's where Lewis and Clark picked up the person that you would call Sacagawea, but her name is actually pronounced Sagagawea, and that name is actually a Hidatsa name that means bird woman, Sagaga, and then Mia or Wea if they're combined together. So Sagagawea, so literally means bird woman. And so that's sort of our biggest claim to fame, and in our biggest, I guess, quote unquote, contribution to American history. So I represent those three tribes, and our ancestral lands are located in the northern central North Dakota into Montana, and we were sort of right in the middle of two different bands of the what would be called the Great Sioux Nation. They call themselves the Oyate, but the Great Sioux Nation had two major territories that branched off into Wyoming, South Dakota, and into almost all of South Dakota, parts of North Dakota, and Minnesota. And so we were sort of in that little strip in between, and those were our ancestral lands. So it's just kind of a brief overview of who we are, where we come from, and where we're located on the United States map, modern United States map.
No, that's very helpful. And actually, I'm listening to you, and it's interesting, even the way you and I, African Americans do this too, that we have to kind of switch our language to even explain what we're trying to say,
Yeah.
because you're like, wait, it's not the real map, but it's the map that, um,
Right.
and we'll talk more about how, well, not necessarily how the map came to be, but some of the factors that might have led to that. And for those that, we're not gonna have time to get into all of that tonight, but I would definitely recommend go check out, subscribe to Phil Fox channel so he can go in depth on things like the Doctrine of Discovery. I don't know if everybody caught that in the title of this video, by the way. I flipped that.
Yeah.
I thought it was clever, maybe not.
It was. No, I liked it. I liked it.
Other things though, I mean, I think, Phil, you can kind of speak to this. I know I hope it's not offensive, but Chris Rock had this joke some years ago, or I think it was Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle, one of them. But he's like, "When's the last time you seen a Native American family at Red Lobster or something?"
Oh yeah.
Like when's the last time? So I'm getting to the point of people, unfortunately, have forgotten, about Native Americans as though they're a thing of the past. They don't
Right.
even really understand or interact with the current Native Americans who are still here and still thriving and living. And so how do you feel? I mean, I kind of guess how you feel, but how do you kind of explain or navigate those spaces to even be able to have conversations where you don't have to change up your lingo every time?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really, it's complex and simplistic at the same time.
Hmm.
And it is unfortunate, there are a lot of people that do believe, or at least are under the assumption, that Native people don't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
Like, here's a short story. We were I have two daughters, right? And so, of course, and just the nature of our culture is that when you infriend people, right, it's sort of akin to how we look at each other as brothers and sisters in Christ.
Hmm.
It's more than just when you become friends with somebody, you become family.
Hmm.
And so when you have these people, so of course we have a lot of kids that come through. Our house is sort of the safe haven house. Our door is always open to all of our girls, or both of our girls. I say all of our girls because we have so many friends that are so close, and we literally treat them, like family,
Right.
and so they can come here and eat. They can come here. I mean, most of the kids will just come in and they'll or raid our pantry, our snack cupboard, and all that stuff. But so we had one of my oldest daughter, who's now she's in the middle high school grades, and this was back when she was in middle school.
Hmm.
And her middle school friend we picked her up to go swimming, and I had our indigenous powwow music on. And this is because I am a singer. I sometimes I say was, because it's been years since I've sang, but I'm a powwow singer, and I used to sing with a championship drum group called Yellowface,
Wow.
and we would travel to the country, and so I'm a powwow singer, and I used to sing, and still am active member of the group, but our group hasn't got together. But we're a well-known championship drum group. And so I listen to our music all the time, not our particular, but Native music in general,
Yeah.
flute music, powwow music. There's other styles too, round dance and others, which is besides the point. But so I had our Native music on, and the young girl was like, "What is this?" So she sort of whispered it to to my oldest daughter, and she's like, "Oh, this," it was normal to her, of course. And she was like, "Oh yeah, this is our music, our Native music." And she's like, what kind of Native? What are you
Hmm.
talking about? And so my daughter tells her, like, yeah, Native American, like we're Native American. And she said, that's impossible. All the natives are dead.
Wow.
And so my daughter, I believe, was a seventh grader at the time. And so this girl was a year older, and she was an eighth grader. And so an eighth grader in middle school in the United States, around 2018, 2017, or roughly around there. So unfortunately, there's a lot of people who don't understand, and Adam Coleman says it all the time. People are poor historians and even worse philosophers.
Yeah.
But the historian aspect is correct, because I mean, even the fact that I'm from North Dakota, right? I was born and raised in North Dakota, Western North Dakota. A lot of people are like, where is that? Is that Canada? And I'm like, did you not graduate from high school? Or I mean, how did you graduate and not understand these things? You know what I mean? But it's just an indictment on the school
American
system.
education
And
system.
yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's that it. And that's unfortunate. It is that way for, so there is a lot of education that needs to happen, and
Yes.
and it's so funny, because it's rare that people hear or run into a, I'm with all intents and purposes, I'm full-blood Native American. I was raised on the reservation. I know my tribal customs. I understand, although by blood I do have some European admixture. I'm 32 35ths or something like that. So I have like very little European admixture in my quote unquote DNA, but even that's a foreign concept to our tribal identity. We weren't tribal by blood. We were tribal by culture. And so a lot of those westernized ideologies are creeping into our understanding, in our the way that we sort of conduct ourselves, and how we go through, and how we operate in this day and age. So yeah, it's definitely, there's some definite challenges and stuff like that, but yeah, so so it is a challenge. It is for sure, and I wish it wasn't such a hard thing.
Yeah. No, I feel for you, and it is a sad indictment when yeah. Anyway, I'll leave that one alone for now. So that kind of could lead into, so now kind of understanding. I mean, there's people thinking there aren't any Native Americans, and then there's Native Americans who are here, and they're like, nah, we're still here. So what challenges have you had, or have you seen in the culture and the community, to be able to communicate the gospel to Native Americans, or as a Native American?
Ooh, Alex. Yeah, so this is going to be kind of a longer answer. So,
Okay.
chat and family, please, please walk with me for a moment, because, right now, and I'll start with right now, because the first part of your question was the challenges. So the challenges is that there's a deep mistrust of Christianity. And this distrust stems from some very, very, very sketchy moments of history throughout the Americas. And what we have to understand, and as I have been, and you mentioned the Doctrine of Discovery early on, and actually I have to do a show on that, Lord willing, this Sunday.
Okay.
I've done a show that has sort of tilled the groundwork for the Doctrine of Discovery, in the ideology of manifest destiny.
So let me pause you real quick. So can you explain just those? I mean, the brief explanation of doctrine.
Yeah.
What is the Doctrine of Discovery, and what is manifest destiny, for those who may
Okay.
not know?
All right. So yeah. So yeah, buzzwords and stuff. Yeah, absolutely. So we need to explain what we're talking about. So the Doctrine of Discovery, essentially what it was, is it was several papal bulls that were in the 16th century, that were authorized by the Pope. So the bull itself is an edict. And so these edicts by the Pope helped establish what was some of the earliest international law when it came to the rights of quote unquote discovery, right? So it was the European powers by the Pope, who was based in Europe, and giving the authority to the these different crowns or nations, French, the Portuguese, Britain, giving them the authority, Spain, giving them the authority to quote unquote discover these lands, and lands were literally considered quote unquote empty. And there's a term for that. It's called terra nullis. But these lands were considered empty because they were housed or they were occupied by basically brown, non-Christ believing pagans. So simply based on that, they were allowed to enslave, eradicate, and also take the land and maintain control of all natural resources. And so it was that which helped fund and enrich the church, because that's who gave the authority. And then also and so some of this is the groundwork for a lot of the what the initial question was the mistrust. So you can see why there is this distrust, is because this was the ideology. So the doctrine of discovery allowed for the taking of the land. And then the manifest destiny within itself is that not only was it justified to take the land, but the manifest destiny was God ordained taking of those lands and of those lands, of those peoples, and of those resources. And so literally in their minds, but not only in their mind politically, it was also in their mind theologically. So it was twofold, which is why and some of this stuff is stuff that will unravel as well in the doctrine of discovery, and as well as I'm going to critique later on Christian nationalism. But all of these things are all foundational and bedrock ideologies of why there is the distrust of not only Native peoples in the Americas, but Native peoples in all colonized regions throughout the world. Because this doctrine didn't just touch the United States.
Right.
It didn't just touch Canada. It touched South America. It touched Central America. It touched the islands. It touched the Philippines. It touched it touched down under. Shout out to Warrior Woman.
Yep. And like, I don't want to go on a tangent about this specific thing, but the Queen just passed. People are feeling different ways because not even just her, but her too.
Right.
But that whole lineage of royalty,
Right.
or whatever you want to call it, it's been a lot of damage done.
Yeah. And a lot of different places, and there's a lot of after effects as well. Example is the church, but essentially the church and the government were in bed with each other. And it's impossible to unravel the two, especially throughout history.
Right.
So because people want to say, oh well, that wasn't the church, or that wasn't us, or you can't mix, oh, here we go, church and state. Yeah. But oh my goodness, you talk about bad historians.
Yeah.
the church literally had more influence than the state did, as far as power and the political realm, and the crown or the country would not make a move without the church's blessing.
Right.
And this is evident not even just in the 1600s. This is evident through the Crusades early. So colonialism and eradication of the other started way before these papal bulls had come about. and in the name of God, right?
Right.
They were trying to eradicate the Saracens or the Moors or the Muslims,
Yeah.
and that's what way earlier than contact in America.
Yeah.
But I digress. So getting back to the point, and getting back to what you initially asked. So those two things, Doctrine of Discovery, Manifest Destiny, are two very key elements that have provided a ton of mistreatment of Native peoples and of just minorities in general in these United States now. And I'm speaking in the context of the United States,
Yeah.
but because of that, this ideology is how we get 500 plus broken treaties.
Mm.
This is how we get situations like Kamloops finding 215 undisclosed, undiscovered children in a mass burial site. This is how we get boarding schools in the first place. This is how we get ideas like the merciless Indian savages, which is in the founding documents of these United States. And you look at you because I mean, I coming to these ideas and research, doing some of the research, a lot of the early state constitutions had elements of discovery in them, saying that no native tribe or no Indian tribe can sell their lands except to us exclusively, and all this stuff. And then until it was standardized that no tribe can sell only to the government.
Yeah.
But all of these elements are deeply embedded, and they were enacted throughout history. And that's where a lot of these ideas and a lot of this mistrust comes from. And so people always think, oh, well, that was the government. Where did the government get these ideas from? They got them from the church. They got them from, and also people, and again, people want to try to separate church and state. There's no, we got to separate church and state. Well, boarding schools, not that old.
Yeah.
My grandmother was a boarding school survivor. My grandmother raised me. My mother was off, in and out of my life, doing things, trying to figure herself out. And praise God, she found herself. But my grandmother was the one who raised me primarily, her and my mom's oldest sister. But in our culture ways, my mom's sisters are actually my mom's. So I have, essentially, because we're very generational, and we're very close. We have a closer unit as far as our family structure.
Yeah. I
So
love that.
all of my aunts and uncles, or basically my whole mom's generation, all of her and my father's generation on his side as well. Those are all my brothers, sisters, moms, dads. We don't necessarily have uncles per se and aunts per se. So yeah. So my oldest mom raised me along with my grandmother, but my grandmother was a boarding school survivor. And so people like to separate these things out in their mind and say, "Oh, this was so long ago."
Hold on real quick. You said survivor. So what was happening there to survive?
Yeah. So boarding schools, the ideology behind boarding schools was literally, and the gentleman who created the concept used the concept of boot camp and separating the soldiers away from their common society to recreate this person into a killer, into a soldier.
Right.
So they use that concept to, and this was the slogan that General Pratt used, to kill the Indian and save the man. So their idea was literally to kill the Indianness of children, babies, and how they enacted this and how they would do this, because many, of course, so we just talked about how the families were very close and very tight, because the tribes, it was very, there was a there you know, even within our, like, with, here's an example. So within our we had earth lodges, these things called earth lodges.
Mhm.
They're large, round, they're like a big mound, and they have like a little space for you to entrance and exit. And these things are so massive that you can fit like sometimes up to 15 families, not
Whoa.
just 15 people, 15 families, multi-generational families,
Wow.
and each had their own space, right? So so these are very close-knit communities. And so they were reluctant to give their children over to this government. First of all, this government, up to this point when boarding school was started, the government had already broken massive treaties and also pushed them aside and created reservations.
Right.
And so so there was this government they already distrusted. And then here comes the church, right? Because there was very few federal or state run boarding schools, but 90% of the boarding schools were run by religious organizations, most of them the Catholic Church.
Hmm.
And the Protestant church is like, see, most of them were, but no, the Protestant church was right on board with it.
Yeah.
They just weren't as prevalent, and they weren't as established yet. So the denominations weren't, the denominations that we see today. They didn't have as much strength and as much money as they do today. So and so what they did was they shipped these, and the government used the treaties, they used rations, and they used force to make sure that the children were given to the boarding school. So they said, listen, you're going to lose reservation space, or we're going to starve you, and your rations will not come if you do not give your children. Or they were forcibly taken. Soldiers showing up at the door, forcibly taking children. So imagine your kids today, just some foreign entity coming to your door and saying, your children are coming with us. Otherwise, we'll cut your paycheck. You won't be able to survive.
Yeah.
And so they had no choice. And so so that's the ideology. And so that's why we say boarding school survivors, because that's just how they were able to get the children. That's how they were able to procure them. The things that they had to deal with were harsher than any soldier ever had to deal with. There was a story in Sarah Augustine's book, The Land Is Not Empty. And she had listened to this very well-known, very strong a native leader from Canada. And she had witnessed this very strong, advanced in age, but he was very well fit and demanded a lot of and just in his presence. And she watched him in her storytelling. She said she watched him as he told the story of them coming for the first time to the boarding school, and how they had to watch they had to watch the church folks, or the those who are running the boarding school. They had to watch them burn their clothes that were handmade and appropriate for the weather, because these were people who lived in the region for thousands of years. So they understood what was needed to be able to survive in the winter. And so they burned their clothes and then gave them. So they literally, from the time that they set foot on that property, they begin the identity stripping. So first it started with their clothing, their jackets, their common clothes, and then their moccasins, their footwear, all handmade personally by their parents. And then so she began to watch this man, this strong man transform before her eyes into the 12-year-old that he was when he entered there. And so, and I've seen this as well firsthand. I've seen elders who in public they buried children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews. They buried siblings. They buried their parents. They buried spouses without shedding a tear in public. But I've seen those same people when they're telling their story about boarding school. I've seen those people break down, and literally the same experience that Sarah Augustine had and retold in her book. I had that same experience in watching these elders with tears streaming down their face because of the reenactment in their mind and them journeying back to that place that they were in.
Yeah.
And these are people who are still alive. This isn't thousands of or hundreds of years ago, fam.
Yeah. So, wow. Let me see where I want to go. So we understand the history, the painful history. It even raises the question more that I started with is like, I mean, you're saved. Like, how'd that happen? I mean, like how? I mean, I can imagine the difficulty, like you said, of communicating and accepting the gospel in that culture.
Right.
But it has happened. It's happening. Like, how in the world? How?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, first of all, God, it was God.
Yeah.
There's just no other way, because just typically I was hurt. And this is what you'll find in any Native community. There's a lot of distrust. There's a lot of folks who are confused even. There's a lot of folks who are just absolutely confused and don't understand why that these people who proclaim this gospel tend to overlook things in their heart cries, right? So, treading softly, but social issues,
Yep.
Things that impact minority communities, and I was the same way. And it was by God's grace that I found, or God had sent a group of missionaries that actually did it right. I'm highly critical of missionaries that just simply go out to do service projects. I call those the blow in, blow up, and blow out type of missionaries, and they literally just come to make themselves feel good. But there was the model that this missionary group had. It was actually my spiritual father and my spiritual mother Sue Rogers, God bless her soul, is now with the Creator. And I still have the opportunity to still communicate with my spiritual father.
Yeah.
And also, alongside there was some very, very awesome, amazing brothers and sisters in Christ, people who've invested in me, who were already established believers. Another one of my sort of spiritual mothers, Diane Mitchell, who just had gone with the Lord. She's a fellow native. Actually, she's my grandmother in our tribal ways. And her husband and their family, Robert and all their family, and so they invested in me heavily, and gave me the opportunity to grow and to preach and to do all these things. And so, but it was not without struggle. It was not without a lot of your typical things that you would even see. We're in the realm of urban apologetics, right? So
Right.
a lot of the arguments that you'll see as urban apologists that are in the urban communities are virtually the same.
Yep.
So white man's God, why would you follow a white man's religion? why are you acting white?
Yep.
How, I've heard that, black folks getting called Uncle Tom, cooning, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
For me, I was called an apple, right? I'm red on the outside and I'm white on the inside.
Wow.
so, so I
I
mean,
never.
yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's a lot of the same argumentation, but the biggest and hardest thing though, and the reason why, I guess not the biggest and hardest, but the biggest influence and the biggest reason why was because my spiritual father and my spiritual mother, their idea and their model was to love first and to listen first
Right.
instead of preach first. And what they were able to do is they were able to establish camaraderie, friendship, and they were able to establish a connection,
Mm.
as opposed to just coming in and I'm going to tell you what this is. I'm going to tell you what this is about, and you need to conform to this.
Yeah.
See, because what usually happens is the dominant culture, dominant society, Christian, or just a label, white Christianity. What they do is they tend to have a gatekeeper mentality.
Mm.
This is how you need to act. This is how you need to walk. This is how you need to preach. This is how you need to worship. This is how you need to dress. All these things. So I flip that on them and say, well, what if I said, in order for you to be a Christian, you need to speak Hidatsa. You need to dress like a Hidatsa. You need to understand our Hidatsa customs, our Hidatsa ways. You need to understand our social gatherings, all of these things. You need to become Hidatsa in order to be a Christian.
Mm.
I said, what if I said that to you? How crazy does that sound?
Right.
So again, these are the things, and this is why we need to, ethnocentric, exactly, MJ. But these are some of the things that we need to understand. Bless you.
Right.
And these are some of the ways that helped me to become more cognizant of how to approach people, because I seen how God broke their hearts and how God broke my heart for my own people. Because my ministry, even my ministry name, Drops of Hope Ministries,
Mm-hmm.
it started with me, because I came to Christ when I was 16. It was in my transition summer. I was transitioning from 8th grade to my freshman year to my sophomore year. And when I was playing basketball, I played basketball in high school. I know I may not look like it, but I was an athlete. But there was a suicide epidemic happening on a reservation in the state, and I knew a lot of people very close because I played basketball with them, played basketball against them. We played summer leagues, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And so they were losing like one child a week.
Whoa.
And that's whoa. But imagine in a reservation that has 6 communities, that some communities are only as large as 150 people. So imagine one child a week from that reservation dying from suicide. And so I seen the hopelessness with a lot of my people. And back then, my reservation was not rich. We've been blessed, and it's controversial, but my reservation actually was part of the 2008 oil boom. They found the deep deposits of oil, and so actually money is flowing right now like milk and honey because of the oil, but it wasn't always that way.
Right.
And so during that time, there was a lot of hopelessness. There was a lot of things that were, it just seemed like we didn't have a chance. And then so that was, I wanted to provide something. And so the drops portion is because historically my people are not readers. My people we're oral people. We have oral traditions. We have, we're akin. Here we go. Theology time. We're akin to the Old Testament, New Testament Jews.
Yep.
The people of Jesus' time. A lot of our values, a lot of our social customs, a lot of our the overall ideologies are very close to the Jesus way, are very close to the tenets that Jesus had taught.
Do you think that made it an easier transition for you, or did you not know?
What happened? Well, see, now okay, so at first, because my first interaction with any formal training was steeped in Reformed theology.
All right, so let's go here. That was my next question. Let's just go ahead and go. So let me set it up a little bit. And so I want everybody tuning in to understand before we get into this. This is not to bash anybody or a specific denomination or group or whatever. But we're speaking broadly in general terms. Even if we name names, it's more about the clash of cultures and more about the how that clash of cultures might impact theology, if that makes sense. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, here we go. Buckle up. Time for some violence. I'm glad MJ's here. So my first introduction to any formal theological frameworks was Reformed, but not just any Reformed. It was sort of the guise of the John MacArthur types, and quite literally just steeped in him specifically, because my pastor had he had a it's probably like an 8-foot shelf that he built himself, and those y'all might remember those micro really thin CDs that you could buy like 10 or 20 in a pack.
Yep.
So he had like 20 years or 30 years of John MacArthur CDs in those little tiny, and they were just all lined up, 8 feet worth of them.
Wow.
And so he would let me basically borrow like a library. He would say, go ahead. Yeah, here, go ahead. You can take 3 at a time.
Yeah.
And so I would listen to them wall to wall. Like as soon as I got home from school, I would pop one in, listen to it, be doing stuff, doing my homework. I was on fire for the Lord. And then, so I had that sort of quote unquote, informal training. And then I went to formal training. I went to Jackson Hole Bible College, which was again steeped in MacArthurism. And so the church literally was started by MacArthur's elders. So they set up the church polity, they set up the elder structure, they set it, this is sort of the sermon outlines and these types of things. So all of it was wrapped into the MacArthur realm. And so there was questions. So there was massive questions that I had. And so again, this isn't to bash Reformed theology per se, but there is this idea of what people are calling now Reformed culture. It's a very different thing. So it's taking the shell of Reformed theology and it's sort of using it as just simply as a worldview. There's very little theological depth of it. And at least this is my interpretation, because I was steeped in it. And I was not trained to go biblically and to look at passages and really get in depth as far as what's the theological underpinnings for some of these things. It was just simply because MacArthur said so, or Sinclair Ferguson said so, or Steve Lawson said so, or you know what I mean? And so these are guys I admire even still. I mean, I still love Sinclair Ferguson. I don't listen as much, but I mean, still, there's still a lot of depth there. And so
when you're in Bible college now, to kind of catch it up, that you are in this phase, you're being kind of, I don't want to say indoctrinated, but this is the only voice you're really hearing a lot of.
Right.
So when you're in class or in some of these classes, you start thinking clearly for yourself, and you're like, okay, I hear you, but what about this?
Right.
And then next class, you're like, okay, I hear you, but what about this? And then what would happen typically when you kind of brought up the what about this?
Right. Yeah. So, and shout out to SOC, Servant of Christ Ministries, man. Happy birthday, bro.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Glad to see you, brother. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would come up with questions, or I would see, and something just would not sit flushly, if you will. It seemed off. And so I would question, and the response typically that I would get would be, well, if you want to continue to segregate yourself, that's on you. No theological explanation, no, it was basically just fall in line. Fall in line, or you're committing heresy is sort of what was hinted at. And so it wasn't until years later that I finally start, and quite literally, I mean, the UA, the Urban Apologists, so shout out to the Bodega crew, to you, to a lot of these different type thinkers that exposed me to a lot of different ideas. And it was the first time, like even now to this day, I still have trouble sitting down and reading NT Wright.
Wow.
Because NT Wright was so demonized by that side.
Wow.
That to me it still feels dirt. So even like I think I've read maybe 6 chapters of an NT Wright book, or of any mixture of NT Wright books.
Get on it, bro.
And that's what I mean. And that's what I mean. So yeah. I've read a lot of the theology with him, and was it with him and Bird that just dropped the theology book?
This one, the big one?
Yeah. So I'm like deep in that one. So, but see, there and again, it's like it's NT Wright and someone else, so it's not just exclusively NT Wright. But I mean, that's what I mean, and you sort of hit it on the head. Like, yes, it's sort of it was sort of that indoctrination aspect of it, where it was simply taught, and to think anywhere outside of that, it was and Chris asked, what was their issue with NT Wright? It just because he had a different theological perspective. That's all. Of course, NT's big on the new perspective on Paul.
Yeah.
And so that they feel is very, it's new, it's not old, so it can't be true, type of stuff.
And I think that name might be misleading because it's not new, like you said. It's just you got to give it a name so you can explain what you're, But anyway,
right?
Yeah, I get it.
Right. Yeah. So that was basically the that whole experience. But the thing is that there was a lot of not necessarily questions about orthodoxy. There was a lot of questions about how this corresponds to orthopraxy.
Oh man, now you're speaking my language.
Yeah.
So can you give an example of a question or a type of question that you were asking it then? Because I think people hear me say orthopraxy every week anyway, but that only started like 3 years ago. So it's not like I don't remember ever in church or ministers training or any of these things ever even hearing that word.
Yeah.
We talk about doing, we talk about the practice, and we talk about serving. So it's there in that context, but a fuller understanding of orthopraxy is usually not something most Christians have the way they do about orthodoxy,
right?
If they do. So what kind of orthopraxy questions were you asking?
So yeah, at that time I didn't understand, that it was an orthopraxy type question. But so so here's the easiest one and probably the biggest one that would hit home for a lot of us, right? So our identity in Christ, right? So I was being told, or at least being taught, or hinted at, that these things, when you become alive in Christ, that you basically essentially lose all past identity. And so I would ask, like, but wait, so what does that mean for me as a native person? My context,
Yeah.
right? So they said it, but they didn't mean it, because still they would say, you need to go back to your people and tell them about Jesus and, all this stuff. So how am I supposed to do that? Because now I got this foreign message that's even foreign to myself,
Yeah.
and I even have questions about it.
Right.
So how am I going to go back and communicate this? So what
And
I
if
didn't
you
realize,
did communicate it, you would do so as a Native American.
well, I would do it as a Native American,
Right.
but under the banner of dominant culture, reform culture.
I see.
So that's where the miss was. So instead of culturally and doing this stuff instinctively that I would normally do as a native person.
Mhm.
So of course, we all, and part of the reform thing, and you don't necessarily have to be reformed to be, I'm going to use the word Calvinist, but I went through, and I was probably the banner kid of cage stage Calvinist. And
Said what
so
stage?
the cage stage, where you belong in a cage rather than out in public.
I ain't heard that one. I was like 5 point, 7 point. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
No, they,
yeah.
they call it the cage stage, because you quite literally think you're smarter than anyone in the room.
Mm,
And because you're wielding these great theological perspectives, right? And
yeah.
that's sort of how you feel.
Yeah.
But and I was surprised to learn that I wasn't the only one that went through that. So, but again, it was so embedded, and I had so much zeal. So yeah, I hurt a lot of people because I didn't care, because what I was doing was in their best interest. So it didn't
Mm,
matter that I hurt them, or it didn't matter that I hurt the relationship that I had with them.
wow.
And so that was contrary to everything that was about me as a native person, because everything about us. So because what we have to understand is native people, yes, I understand and I know, and people accuse native people of doing this all the time. I know that we weren't just in canoes paddling and everything was sweet with Pocahontas. No, I understand that. I know that there were wars. I know that there was conflict between tribes. But again, it's always painted as, oh, it was just mere savagery, and they were just wanted to kill people, and they raped people, and they pillaged all this stuff. Okay, sure. But most of that was done out of survival. It
Right.
wasn't done out of greed. It wasn't done just to simply expand territories, because most tribes had their ancestral territories for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And they would migrate, and yes, they would shift, and all this stuff, but most tribes were just trying to survive.
And also, how so how if your issue, quote unquote, with these quote unquote people, these natives, is that they're always fighting and they're savages, how does you killing all of them
Right.
not put you in the same boat?
Right.
Like
Right.
the irony, the cognitive dissonance there is just
Right.
shocking.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. I killed no natives. I had no slaves.
Mm,
That's the counter argument always. But no. So you want to talk about all those things in the past, but then yet you want to exempt yourself. So what I say is, like, listen, that's part of why there's the hyper, and again, this is sort of off topic a little bit, but that's why there's such an emphasis on the hyper individualistic portion of the theology, the American theology,
yeah.
right? And that's why I bang on that so hard, because this idea of ultimate individualism, what it does is it allows for the sin of the individual to die,
Mm,
but it allows for the sin of the community to live on.
wow.
So that's why, and that's how they've gotten around this for so long, because they've exempt themselves from any repercussions having any hand. And again, and of course, what scripture do they run to? Well, you're not responsible for the sins of your father. Yes, but let's not forget, please, fam, let's not forget, the fact that God judged nations,
Right.
that God dealt with nations, right? And so we need to have a fuller understanding and get outside our theological box. And so for me, it was absolutely difficult and to formulate some of these ideas, because it's not just the easy string, just to, it's not like, Native American beadwork where you just got all of these beads in front of you and you just sort of design it. No, these beads are scattered here, there, everywhere, and you have to sort of piece them together. And it was the same with the Doctrine of Discovery. It was the same with Manifest Destiny. And it's the same thing with Christian nationalism, because people have elevated and are conflating their faith with their politics and their politics with their faith. And doing these things hurts communities.
Yeah.
And Native communities understand the wrongs that happen to them, because what most people fail to realize is that in first contact, many of the tribes were actually absolutely accepting of the gospel message, because it was similar to them. They can hear it. They understood the concepts. And so the confusing part was when these people who have this peace, have this supposed understanding of Creator and God and his tenets and the things that he tells us throughout Scripture, and Jesus himself shows us how to operate. Yeah. It was confusing to them when things were beginning to fall apart and things were absolutely the complete opposite. They were contrary to the Scripture.
Yeah. Man, I appreciate you sharing this. This is a whole history lesson. So that those kids that don't know that y'all are still around, they need to watch this, because this is a whole history lesson, man. You can go teach this in college. So Wawo has a question that's actually going to be kind of similar to my question anyway. And my question, and maybe this is all together, is what should we, the church, the whole church, do better or do more of for Native Americans, in the same way that she's asking, how can we be more sensitive just to understanding the plight of the people who have passed and are still here?
Right. So some of it is just understanding and realizing the history, right? There's, and Wawo, your lands have been heavily colonized as well. There's indigenous peoples, in Australia and New Zealand, and so and I'm sure that the plight is the same thing. Is they're probably crying for just for simple acknowledgement or recognition. Not recognition is probably the worst word, but just acknowledgement. One of our good brothers, Isaiah Robertson, last Thanksgiving reached out and he was like, I want to do something that is not just simply, for the sake of paying homage to Native peoples. What are some things that I can do to teach my kids that we're actually living on lands that were stolen? And I said, that's a great question. So I would start with just looking at the history. There's a cool website that's called native.land.ca, and you can actually go and you can look and see what land, the ancestral lands that you're currently sitting on right now with GPS. There's an app. You can go to the website through Chrome and go and look at their tribal websites. Go and look at their history. Go and look at these things. Thanks, Wawo. She put it up in the chat. And so go and look at those things and and see who these people are, and still are today. Shoot, maybe take a day trip out of it. One of the coolest things ever, or some of the most fun things to do, is when people come and ask questions and I get to share about my culture, because for me, what it does is, like, yes, there are the folks who are coming and like grabbing your hair. I don't have hair, but they'll oh wow, your hair is so beautiful, and oh, so what's the significance behind the the round dance, and what's the, they're asking all these questions, and sometimes it comes off as like, man, get off me, and there has been a couple times even in my past where like people will come up and maybe they were genuine, maybe they weren't, but I would tell them the same thing. Wow, how'd you get your hair so curly? What's the significance behind the square dance anyway? So I wasn't as graceful, in times past, but
It is. But there's a commercial right now. Where did I just see this? Might have been somewhere on Facebook or something, and it was like a joke video, one of those videos, prank. It's not a prank video, but you know what I'm saying. And this white dude approaches a Asian woman, but he approaches her as though she's straight off the boat, right? And he's talking to her like that, and then she's like, "Yeah, I'm from San Diego." He's like, "No, but where are you from?"
Right?
Yeah, you seen that? Yeah. And then she does it to him, and it's hilarious.
Yeah,
Anyway.
so yeah, that would be the biggest thing, is just understanding those things. And then, like I think, was it you, Alex, that put up the post about the underwater cities and towns and stuff like that?
Yep.
Yeah, so like,
that's crazy.
yeah, so those types of things where like there's this history that has been blown over, and unfortunately, and Alex and I were just on with MJ and Chris talking about, CRT and those types of things. But going back into history and looking at the actual history there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Correcting the false narrative of even something as simple as like Abraham Lincoln, right? Abraham, the great emancipator, and oh wow, he was this great proponent of anti-slavery and all this stuff. But you look into the history books and you're like, he wasn't. Have you read the Lincoln Douglas debates? Like,
right.
He didn't. He wasn't. And so just looking at those things, and I would challenge you, like I would challenge everyone to go back and read the founding documents, read the Declaration of Independence. Most people haven't. Most people are shocked when I tell them that 30 lines below, "We the people, all men are created equal," that on 30 lines below that, it calls Indians savages.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And people don't realize that.
Yep. Second paragraph of the Constitution, I'm called 3/5 of a person.
Right.
Like it's weird. It's kind of weird. Look, I think about it now. It's very close to the introduction. Like this was important to them to get in there.
Right.
Like that. You know what I mean? That's kind of like, okay, like y'all, it wasn't like an addendum. It wasn't an amendment.
Right.
This is like, we need to get this in on the first page.
Right. It needs to be there. Obvious. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The 3/5 doctrine, stuff like the one drop rule, for black people and African Americans.
Yeah.
The blood quantum rule, which we touched on briefly, so what was the purpose between those two things? Because they're absolutely, they couldn't be further apart from each other ideologically.
Right.
Because the one drop rule was to maintain the slave race, essentially.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of that was the native blood quantum rule, which meant to breed out Native American people. So the government wasn't obligated to honor the treaties or honor anything for Native people. So there's clear, concise evidence that can't be denied.
I never thought about that. So one group, you want to keep their own blood, quote unquote.
Right.
And the other group, you're intentionally kind of mixing in your blood, not yours personally, but white blood, to dilute the population.
Right.
Wow.
There's even law, reading American Indian law and looking at this, like this is some of the stuff are things that we are looking at as a terra nullius. I touched on that briefly, but yeah, that is empty land. The land is empty. but yeah, looking at these ideas and how they affect even today, because now what happens is so I own some land, right? And right now I own 9% on a 350 acre tract of land, or 325 to be, uh, but so I own 9% of that. My kids now, I have two children, and so that's going to be broken up into two, right? So when I
Mhm.
move on, and then their kids. But
Mm.
here's the thing: is that there's stipulations even now within the law, American Indian law, that once they're broke down into what they're calling microfragments,
Hmm.
uh, the land goes back into trust under the United States. So
Always a
the
loophole.
yes, so but that's the thing though, is so again, that's and this concept of trust land. Imagine imagine Mexico saying, "Yo, America, why don't you just let us hold Texas?" Like, it's never gonna happen.
Right.
The Alamo happened. You know what I mean? They fought for, or Texas even itself fought for
Right.
itself to become an independent state or independent nation. But still, like, trust the for some reason, trust land doesn't work anywhere else in the world, but for some reason, when it comes to Native people, trust land works with the government. But again, these are all things that that people don't understand and realize that are true to this day. Another example, last example, real quick. Things aren't things aren't of today. These things don't really impact us today. And some in the chat have probably heard before, because I've said this before and I've said it many times. But here's the thing: is if there's no systemic issues, systemic racism, these things aren't embedded within the country and within the absolute fabric of the country. Let's use the Department of Interior
Hmm.
for an example. Are you familiar with the Department of Interior and what they do, Alex?
I'm not familiar with everything they do, but I know. Is there a separate one that deals with land, or is that part of the interior?
That's yeah. So the Department of Interior is the land and animal management branch of the government.
Right.
Embedded in the Department of Interior, the land and animal management of the government is the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Mm.
So, just with that logic, Alex, what does that say to us as Native people?
Says you're not people, you're part of the animals and the land.
Right. And that notion is not lost on us.
Yeah.
We're not part of the foreign affairs. We're not looked at as foreign entities. We're not in another branch of the DOD. We're not in, any other place, but we're in the land and management branch of the United States government. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Indian Education, all of that is in the Department of Interior. Now, there's slow progress. Of course, Deb Holland now is she's a native, half native. And see, even there, even just that idea, she's culturally native. So she's a native,
Right.
right? So the public sees her, and old boy Tucker Carlson was like, oh, she's half white, and her parents are, in her last name Holland is actually, so all you I forget what her I think it was Dutch, all you little Dutch girls out there should be proud, because the first Dutch woman is a cabinet in the cabinet of the United States, and just being himself. And
Yeah.
so, but that's the thing, is this concept of blood quantum, half native, he's half black, he's half white, you know, all these are modern concepts, these are modern ideas, you know, and these things they need to be talked about. We need to uncover these things, so that way we can have a solid cognizant view of history in its reality, rather than just simply our 1 month or 2 weeks in November that we go through Native American tribes, and that they were, there was X amount of tribes, and these tribes were horticulturists, and these tribes were semi-nomadic, and all of these types of things. Like, there needs to be an in-depth understanding of the atrocities and the things that have gone down throughout history. And it was shocking, some of the stuff that you even said during the CRT stuff. Like, I hadn't heard, some of the, I've heard, of course, a lot of the slavery stuff, but I didn't realize some of the public atrocities that happened to the males. And I didn't realize it was such a public display. Not because I knew it happened, but I didn't realize it was kind of a, let me establish authority type thing for the slave owners. And that was eye-opening to me. So a lot of these things need to be talked about, and they need to, and it's not, and not just for talking's sake,
right?
For the understanding. So sorry, Wawo, for such a long, drawn out answer, because it's not just something as simple as, let's do this thing, and then now we've honored them and let's move on. No, there needs to be an understanding of who these people were, why they were, what was rich about their history and their culture. And in that way, you know what? You might be able to form an amazing apologetic. You might be able to form an amazing way to reach them with the gospel. If you know about them, you know what makes them tick. You understand culture, you understand life ways, you understand, multiple areas, then you can better communicate the gospel. And not that it's even just about communicating the gospel,
right?
But it's living out that gospel to them. Sister Dana Owens, one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned, and one of the most amazing perspectives that I've ever heard is just something as simple as do life. And so to do life with somebody is more Christ-like than just simply preaching at somebody.
Amen to that, man. I talk about life on life discipleship till I'm blue in the face. In fact, our church just started last night reading one of my favorite books. We're going to be going through the Master Plan of Evangelism. If y'all haven't read it, read it. But I also wanted to highlight vocab in their book, because I think what you're talking about is culturally contextualized apologetics. And that's something that requires you to get into the culture. I don't mean the society, secular culture. I'm talking about different cultures of people you're trying to reach, but not just to reach them. Getting to know people for the sake of knowing other people. It's just healthy not to always be around people who think or look like you. That's just not, I just don't think that's good in general, regardless of religion. But doing life together is the only way forward, and it's the only way Jesus used. So I think he knew what he was doing. Man, Phil, I so appreciate you coming, man. I know we could go 2 hours because the history is deep with this one.
Anytime.
I learned a lot, man. I thank you so much.
No, I appreciate it, man.
So listen, everybody go subscribe to Mr. Phil Fox, Drops of Hope Ministries on YouTube. You definitely won't be let down. It's going to be a lot of information, a lot of good, new probably information, judging by what the school system is teaching or not teaching.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead. Any closing words?
Oh, no, man. Oh, I appreciate that. Wawo, our sister from down under, loving it. Yeah, I mean, it's these things don't have to be super complicated. You don't have to get a PhD in indigenous studies, to just learn a few things, and to sort of unravel and unpack some of the things,
Yeah.
And so it's just simple things. Like, we don't have to, I think what we do sometimes, and this, I'm not anti-intellectual at all. I do believe that we need training. We need solid training. But I think sometimes we over dogmatize and we overemphasize uh, these quote unquote deep theological truths. The gospel and Jesus in his time was very simplistic, right? These things were simple. They were concepts that we've had 2,000 years to dissect and to write papers on one word in the Koine Greek and get our doctorate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think that's sometimes I think what we do is we get too close, right? And as native people, usually what we do is instead of getting too close, we try to see what creator is putting in front of us and notice, right? Notice there's a weakness in both.
Yes.
Because you're too far, you can't see the fine details.
Yeah.
And if you're too close, you can't see the big picture.
Right.
So
I like that. Yeah.
So there needs to be a marriage of the two.
Yes.
And that's where culture and I shout out to Dr. Eric Mason in his book Woke Church. I know that woke is a buzzword, but
You're
but
safe.
but his concept of the three understandings, right? So your spirit, who you are in Christ, who you are is in how God created you, and how you're perceived by others. Those are absolutely key, because we need to keep that balance. And so one of the things, and you'll see up here, is Native people, we have this thing called the medicine wheel, and it represents the four different directions. And what it does is it shows us, like, first of all, that there's different cultures. So the colors literally represent different cultures.
Okay.
And so, but also the four directions show that, look, there's people in all directions, but we all meet together in the middle, or at least we should. And so, but the thing is again, it's round. So it helps create, and it represents the cycle, our life cycle, our learning cycle, right?
Yeah.
You start as ignorant, you learn the fact, and then you master it, right? It's a circle.
Yeah.
And then but these concepts, so people, oh my goodness, Phil, how dare you have the medicine wheel in your background? Look, fam, I got predator masks and all that kind of stuff in here too. But no, the point is that, look, I don't have to rock with every single detail of my culture. Right. I understand and know that there are portions of my culture that are unredeemable. But do not be under the false idea that you have no work to do culturally as well. And I'm speaking mostly to the dominant culture.
Right.
Because what happens is we get the gatekeeper mentality, and we feel like, I don't have any work to do culturally. But it starts, again, meets in the middle.
Right.
Works our way out, because it starts with you. And then you also have those that are in your inner circle, your parents, your spouse, your kids, and then they influence you. So there's a culture within that. And then there's a greater culture that is influencing you. Those are your friends, your job. Those people, they're influencing you. They're helping create your worldview. Yeah. So you have to siphon through that too. So there's multiple layers of that. It's not just cultural.
Right.
So people have superimposed this idea of, you need to be, as a Native American, you need to siphon your culture through the Bible, through Christ, and all of these ideas. Well, meanwhile, they're rampant within their own culture.
Yeah.
Which they feel that they're exempt from having to do the same amount of siphoning or straining or whatever, whatever you want to use.
Yeah.
But
yeah. No, I hear you. And it is, it's hard to get people to fix something they don't think is broken.
Right.
So I hear you, bro. But we're going to keep grinding. We're going to keep putting in the work. I love you, love what you're doing. And I just pray that you continue to be faithful with it and successful with everything God's called you to. So thank you to the chat, to the mods.
Thank you.
Appreciate you all, appreciate the whole community. And yeah, until next time, peace.